Hello and welcome to the channel. We are the Hollow Grumps. I am Colum.
And I'm Liam.
And we're here today with our very first review of the original series of Star Trek, of course. But before we do that, if we could get you to like, subscribe, and comment below if you have any thoughts on the episode itself. Now, Liam, why don't you take it off? Tell us about this episode.
So, before anyone points out to us that The Cage is in fact not the first episode of Star Trek, because it aired in, 1989 or something like that, we're just taking it in the order that it appears on Netflix. So we'll be starting off with The Cage, and then we'll get to the pilot of Star Trek, the original series, I think on episode 3. So, that's the order we're following. Anyone wants to follow us on Netflix, that's how we're going to do it. Okay, so this episode starred Jeffrey Hunter, John Hoyt, Majel Barrett, and Leonard Nimoy as the characters of Pike, Dr. Boyce, Number One, or Una, as they've called her in CBS Trek, and Mr. Spock. Okay, so Colin, what did you think of Jeffrey Hunter's portrayal as Captain Pike?
Do you know, I thought he was great. I thought he did an excellent job of portraying an actual human being in a series that, at that time, hadn't even existed yet. He set the groundwork for a lot of, I want to say, character development. Despite the fact that his character wasn't actually in the series, he certainly showed us what a captain was supposed to be. The opening itself is what we expect from Star Trek now. You know, you get to see the Enterprise flying through space, but it's in black and white. And I suppose this would have been common for the time back in, what was it, 69, 66?
I think this one was filmed in like 62 or 63.
Yeah, but so this black and white opening would have been normal, and for it to transition very quickly into color, it must have been quite a surprise for anyone actually watching it. It must have been very reminiscent of The Wizard of Oz.
Well, I think the audience saw this in 1989 in between season 1 and 2 of The Next Generation, which is probably a good viewing point because this is much more the tone of what The Next Generation is. That it probably would benefit seeing it, because this doesn't really contrast very well with the original series, which is kind of a
campy
camp.
Kinda, yeah.
It's his own show, but it's not like this, because this pilot was rejected, so they didn't want to make this show. I'm sure Gene Roddenberry did, but the studios didn't.
First observations of the actual episode itself, it has a very different color scheme. It feels more sci-fi than the original series. The Enterprise doors aren't red. The bridge turbo lift is actually in the wrong spot.
Yes, directly behind the captain's chair.
There's something very nostalgic about this episode. I mean, it has probably to do with the sound design. There's no music, and it's overlaid with special effects and sound effects of the general ambience of the ship. Now, this is something that actually happened right throughout all of the series of Star Trek, and then it was only in the last few years that they started overlaying almost every scene with music, which for me kind of killed it. It's true.
Well, there was a lot of music in the original series, and I thought it was a bit of a nice break, because I'm watching through the original series at the same time as well, and I thought it was a nice break to come to this and have kind of that creepy sci-fi aesthetic of just the ship humming. And it kind of reminded me of like Alien and all that.
The void of space.
Yeah, just the and this episode used to make me feel very cold watching it, because that's just the way I get from these old sci-fi shows. So I watched it whilst having a hot water bottle on my lap, and that kept me warm throughout the entire episode.
I wish he was joking, but he's actually being serious.
Yeah, I'm telling the truth. It doesn't make me feel all warm and fuzzy.
But anyway, it is absolutely remarkable how serious this show is, considering what a theatrical farce it actually became. Did you notice, Liam, all these people on the bridge standing around doing nothing?
Yeah. I noticed there were a lot of funny things, like, remember when Pike was going back to his quarters at the very start, and you see them two people walking along in what looks like beach attire or something like that? But
we didn't have enough costumes, sorry.
Yeah, maybe they were trying to play up the idea that, of course, they were taking a break, that there are families on board the ship.
Oh, but don't forget the fax. The fax machine. I love the fax machine. It's so dated.
I know there are certain things that are dated, but in these reviews, we're not going to go into the production value of the show because there's no point. It's what 50 odd years old,
Why would we
and
nitpick it? It's nearly 70 years old. Like,
yeah. So, one of the reasons we're so hard on things like Picard and Discovery is because a small part of us hopes that our opinions can make the producers change their minds.
so
But this is in the
Kurtzman,
past.
I hope you listen to this, Kurtzman.
Right in.
Last point I want to make before I hand it over to you, Liam, is did you notice the overlay of stars as they engage the warp drive, or the time factor, I believe they called it? It was so weird. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it was so unlike Star Trek. And I cannot imagine modern Trek doing anything like that.
I suppose it looked very trippy, didn't it?
Yeah.
Like they're all, let's go to warp.
And the singing comes in, yeah.
So the thing I noticed that really struck me very early on was the scene between Captain Pike and Dr. Boyce in Captain Pike's quarters. When, of course, we see the downtrodden and just dejected Captain Pike after losing his crew members on Rigel 7. Of course, Pike lost his yeoman and 2 others. And, of course, 7 people were injured. So he's kind of a bit defeated and disillusioned with Starfleet. And Dr. Boyce basically tries to cheer him up. And this scene, I noticed, was almost a direct mirror of the scene of Captain Kirk's birthday in Wrath of Khan. And McCoy is trying to explain to Captain Kirk that he'd have more meaning in his life if he was back on board the Enterprise. That his life is as a Starfleet captain. And then, of course, in the reverse here, Captain Pike wants to stop being a Starfleet captain and to just go off and explore the galaxy, or as we learn in his flashback, or as we learn in his illusion, he'd rather be sitting in the Mojave on a horse and having a picnic. But he doesn't realize the true meaning that his life has as a Starfleet captain right now, and he's just disillusioned. And Boyce is trying to encourage him to stay in Starfleet, that this is what gives his life meaning. And I thought it was an excellent scene. The acting between the two characters was so pulled back, and it wasn't OTT. There was no ridiculous music playing in the background like, well, Pike, you need to stay in your ship.
And there was no key light on his eyes the whole time.
Yeah. the Kirk Shatner eye light. Yeah.
The change in music when Vina appears. Can we just talk about that just for a minute? Because up to this point, everything's been perfectly sci-fi and perfectly normal, I suppose. But we're starting to see that original series creep in. The Kirk creep in. The main Telosian reminds me of Tarkin. Peter Cushing would have been a perfect choice if he wasn't so damn famous.
I know. Why couldn't they get Peter Cushing, 20-year younger Tarkin? And I did like as well the way the Telosian's head pulsated when it was communicating.
I wonder how they did that. Did they just have a little straw that they had someone blowing into from behind? But anyway, the moral of the story. How nice would a cage have to be to live in it? Can you answer that question, Liam?
They touch on it in this episode. It's the whole purpose of the episode, rather. And it's very appropriate given this time that we live in, where everyone's stuck indoors.
And on to the moral dilemma. The Telosians will not work as equals to another race because it is far too dangerous. They will learn their powers and eventually destroy themselves, just like the Telosians did. I suppose this is kind of like, it's kind of like the Prime Directive, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same thing. They don't want to interfere with the development of another race. And in the end, the Telosians kindly give Vina the illusion of beauty and companionship, and no one judges her for taking this life. Even Pike, who believed a meaningless life of illusion was no life at all. Pike changed his viewpoint, agreed with Vina, and grew as a character. And it's a very interesting quandary. Would you be better off living a fantasy life? And on top of all the profoundness of this episode, there were some quirks throughout, which we enjoyed. Colin, do you remember Spock limping around the surface of Talos?
Ah, yes. Isn't that a defining character trait of Spock? That he always limps when he gets on a new planet?
I feel like this is young Leonard Nimoy just discovering the character of Spock and like, huh, what would Spock do? I know, we'll give him a limp. And of course, we got our smiling Spock, which is what started off the whole singing and dancing and laughing Spock of the CBS short trek, because I think they based Spock off of the Cage at that point.
Did they just watch The Cage and they were like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, okay.
I'd say they just watched the Cage.
Yeah.
I mean,
But if there's one thing, okay, I can forgive them just watching The Cage, but what I cannot forgive is that hilarious gorilla suit. What was that?
all these old sci-fi things, they always just grab whatever costumes were left lying around from the last thing that was filmed.
Yeah, it was really... compared to the Telosian's head, this was like... What was it?
And even the fur on it was dreadful.
The eyes just poking out and like the mask wobbling.
Of course, another nice quirk is when the women get transported down to the planet ahead of the men, and Spock runs off and exclaims, "The women!" Which, of course, is out of context, is great fun to watch. You can probably have there's probably a GIF of that, I'd say.
Now, as a whole, Liam, what did you think of the episode? Are you looking forward to getting into Kirk era, or will this make you miss Pike?
That's a tough question, because the Cage isn't the same as the original series, so it's very different. I know that they use kind of the same sets and uniforms and some of the same actors, but the themes and the tone are much more pulled back, are much more theatrical.
Serious. It's very soap opera.
Yeah. I suppose it's going to be very different going on to the original series after this. We'll see. We'll see how we get on with our second, third, whatever view through of the original series that we're going to have.
I really, really liked this episode. And I can't even put my finger on why. This was what I imagine Roddenberry had wanted. And in spite of what the original series became, it was good. I feel like this script is exactly what Roddenberry envisioned, more so than all of his actors having their own opinions on how their characters should act. But yeah,
and we can see he finally got that when we get to Star Trek, the motion picture,
and
even the motion picture. Yeah. It gets a lot more, like a lot of the original series just has goofy things of them walking around old film sets from the 60s and, we're conveniently stumbled upon this planet that looks like an old mafia scene or something like that.
Yeah, because they couldn't afford their own sets and it was cheaper just to go onto them. But anyway, we're getting into ridiculous details.
So we'll leave it there. So if you liked what you saw here, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, because we will be working through each episode of the original series, probably going 2 episodes at a time to get through it faster, and because we don't need to do such nitpicky reviews of each episode, because it's not like we're trying to get people to change the original series. Nobody would ever ask anyone of that. Nobody would want that. So for the Holograms, I'm Liam.
And I'm Colum.
And remember, existence is futile.